Part 1: The Desperate Arrival. The battle cruiser moved slowly through the darkness of space. Its name was Eternal Dawn, and it was dying. The great ship had once been the pride of the Third Fleet, a vessel that had conquered planets and destroyed enemies without mercy. But now it drifted toward Earth with smoke pouring from its wounds and lights flickering like the final breaths of a dying creature. Admiral Orr stood on the bridge and watched the blue planet grow larger on his screen. He was 8 feet tall with scales covering his body like armor. His forearms were crossed over his chest as he thought about what he was doing. They had ruled 17 star systems through strength and fear. They had never asked anyone for help. They had never needed to. But the battle with the raiders had left his ship broken beyond what his own engineers could fix. Half his crew was wounded. His medical bays were destroyed. His engines could barely push the ship forward. He had heard stories about the humans and their repair stations. Other species whispered about them in ports across the galaxy. The humans were young, barely a century into space travel. They were small and weak compared to most galactic races, but they had something that made other species seek them out when their ships were damaged and their crews were hurt. Or did not believe the stories. He thought they were exaggerations spread by species too weak to admit they needed help, but he had no choice now. His ship would not survive the journey to space. Earth was close. The human station called Meridian was his only hope. At Meridian Station, Chief Engineer Danny Morales was drinking his morning coffee when the alert came through. He was a man of average height with brown skin and black hair that was starting to show gray at the edges. He had worked at the station for 15 years, starting as a junior technician and working his way up to running the entire operation. His second-in-command, Laura, rushed into his office with a tablet in her hands. "Danny, you need to see this," she said. He looked at the screen and nearly dropped his coffee. The ship approaching them was massive, easily 10 times the size of any human vessel. Its design was alien and beautiful, with curved lines and surfaces that seemed to flow like water frozen in metal. But the beauty was marred by terrible damage. Plasma burns covered the hull. Entire sections were open to space. The engines flickered with unstable power. "That is a warship," Laura said, "a command cruiser from their Third Fleet." Danny knew what that meant. They were conquerors. They had destroyed entire civilizations. Many in the human government feared them and wanted nothing to do with them. But Danny also saw something else on his screen. He saw a ship full of living beings who would die if no one helped them. "Get the teams ready," he said. "Full repair protocol, medical standing by, food service on alert." Laura stared at him. "Danny, they killed millions on 7. They enslaved the people for 200 years. Right now they are people who need help," Danny replied. "That is all that matters." The Eternal Dawn docked at Meridian Station with difficulty. Its docking systems were damaged, and human technicians had to use emergency clamps to secure it. When the airlock finally opened, Admiral Orr stepped through with 6 of his officers behind him. They wore their ceremonial armor and carried weapons that could level buildings. They expected fear. They expected the humans to bow or run or beg for mercy. Instead, they found Danny Morales standing at the airlock with a smile on his face and his hand extended in greeting. "Welcome to Meridian Station," Danny said. "I am Chief Engineer Danny Morales. We are here to help you." Or looked down at the small human. He could crush this creature with one hand. He could kill everyone on this station if he wished. And yet here stood this man, offering friendship to a species known for destruction. "You are not afraid," Orr said. "It was not a question." "Should I be?" Danny asked. "You came here for repairs, not for war. Your people are hurt and your ship is damaged. Let us help you." The Admiral did not know what to say. In 300 years of military service, he had never encountered anything like this. Enemies feared him. Allies respected him out of obligation. But no one had ever simply offered him kindness without expecting something in return. He shook the human's hand. What followed over the next few days amazed the crew. The human repair teams moved with incredible speed and coordination. They studied the alien technology without hesitation, learning systems that were completely foreign to them. Chief Technician Park led a team into the engine room and spent 18 hours straight figuring out how to rebuild the primary reactor core. When an engineer told him it was impossible, just smiled and said he liked impossible problems. The repair bays of Meridian Station were unlike anything they had seen. The machinery could reshape itself to work on any type of vessel, tools adapted to alien specifications. Diagnostic systems learned new configurations within hours, But it was not the technology that impressed or the most. It was the humans themselves. He watched them work through exhaustion without complaint. He saw them celebrate small victories and encourage each other through failures. He noticed how they treated his crew with respect and curiosity rather than fear or hatred. When a young warrior insulted a human technician, calling her species weak and pathetic, the woman simply laughed and went back to work on his damaged armor, fixing a crack that had been causing him pain for weeks. Lieutenant Commander Drake noticed that many of the wounded were not receiving proper care because their medical bays were destroyed. Without asking permission or waiting for orders, she arranged for them to be brought to the human medical wing. The doctors there had never treated physiology before, but they studied and learned and adapted. By the end of the first week, the Eternal Dawn was already showing signs of recovery. Systems that had been dead were coming back to life. Hull breaches were sealed. Engines were stabilizing. But something else was happening too, something that no one had planned or expected. The crew was changing. They had arrived as conquerors forced into an uncomfortable situation. They had expected to be treated as enemies or at best as paying customers. Instead, they found themselves welcomed as guests. Human workers sat with them at meals and asked about their homes and families. Engineers shared jokes and stories while working side by side. Medical staff held the hands of wounded warriors who had never known comfort from strangers. Admiral Orr walked through the station on the seventh night and saw something that stopped him in his tracks. One of his youngest officers, barely an adult by standards, was sitting in the cafeteria with 3 human workers. They were laughing together. The young officer was trying to teach them a card game while they taught him human jokes that made no sense but made him laugh anyway. Or had conquered worlds. He had destroyed fleets and crushed rebellions, but he had never created what he saw in that cafeteria. He had never built bridges between species or turned enemies into friends. The humans had done it in 7 days without even trying. He returned to his quarters that night with a question burning in his mind. What kind of power was this? It was not the power of weapons or armies. It was not the power of fear or domination. It was something else entirely, something his people had forgotten long ago or perhaps had never known. He did not have a name for it yet, but he knew he wanted to understand it. Part 2: The Human Way. The second week at Meridian Station brought new challenges and new wonders for the crew. Their ship was healing under human hands, but something deeper was happening to them as well. Admiral Orr found himself walking the station corridors at odd hours, watching the humans work and trying to understand what made them so different from every other species he had encountered. Chief Engineer Danny Morales noticed the Admiral's late-night walks but said nothing. He understood that Orr was processing something important, something that might take time to fully grasp. Danny had seen this before in other alien visitors. The galaxy was a harsh place filled with species that operated on principles of strength, dominance, and survival. Humans were the strange ones. They operated on something else entirely. One morning, Danny found Orr standing at a viewing window, watching a team of human engineers repair a section of the Eternal Dawn's hull. The work was dangerous. They were outside the station in spacesuits, welding alien metal in the vacuum of space. One mistake could kill them. "Why do they do this?" Orr asked without looking at Danny. "Your people gain nothing from helping us. We have no alliance. We have no treaty. We are known across the galaxy as destroyers, and yet your workers risk their lives for my ship." Danny stood beside the tall alien and watched his people work. "That is a complicated question with a simple answer. They do it because it is the right thing to do. Someone needed help. We can provide that help, so we do. But there must be payment. There must be some exchange." "There will be payment, yes. We have bills to pay and families to feed, but that is not why we do it. The payment is practical. The work itself comes from something else." Or turned his massive head to look down at the human. "From what?" Danny thought about the question for a moment. "My grandmother used to say that the measure of a person is not how they treat their friends, but how they treat strangers who can do nothing for them. I think the same applies to species. Anyone can help their allies. Anyone can be kind to those who benefit them. The real test is what you do when there is no benefit at all." The Admiral was silent for a long time after that. In the medical wing, Dr. Cole was facing his own challenges. He had been a doctor for 20 years, but he had never treated patients before. Their biology was completely different from humans. They had 2 hearts, 4 lungs, and a circulatory system that used copper-based blood instead of iron. Their nerve structures were alien. their pain responses unfamiliar, their medications unknown. Had lost 2 patients in the first week. A young warrior had died from internal bleeding that did not detect in time because he did not know what to look for. An older officer had passed away from a reaction to medication that should have helped, but instead triggered a fatal response in his alien system. Wept for them both. The medical officer, a stern female named, found crying in his office late one night. She stood in the doorway and watched this human man grieve for members of a species that had been enemies of his kind. They were soldiers, said. They knew death was possible. That does not make it easier, replied. They trusted me to save them. I failed. You did not fail. You tried something no human has ever done. You could not have known. Wiped his eyes and looked at her. I should have known. I should have studied more, prepared better. They died because I was not good enough. Did not understand this reaction. In culture, failed soldiers were forgotten. Those who died from medical complications were marked as weak. No one mourned them beyond their immediate family. Certainly no one from an enemy species would shed tears for them. You confuse me, she said. All of you humans confuse me. Why? Because you care too much about everything, about everyone, even about us. Stood and walked to her. Is that a bad thing? She did not have an answer. Elsewhere on the station, another kind of healing was taking place. Danny had discovered that many of the younger crew members had not eaten properly in days. Their food stores had been contaminated during the battle, and they had been surviving on emergency rations that provided nutrients but no satisfaction. Danny took it upon himself to fix this problem. He spent hours in the station's galley, working with crew members to understand what they could and could not eat. He experimented with ingredients, testing combinations that would be safe for their biology while also being enjoyable to their taste. It was not easy. Many human foods were poisonous too. Others were simply unpleasant. But Danny kept trying until he found dishes that made the young warrior smile. He made a stew using vegetables from the station's garden and proteins that matched dietary needs. He baked bread that had a texture the aliens found comforting. He even created a dessert using fruits that reminded them of home. He sat with them while they ate. He asked about their families, their homes, their dreams for the future. He learned their names and their stories. He laughed at their jokes even when he did not fully understand them. One young warrior named On told Danny about his mother, who was waiting for him on there. She had been against him joining the military. She had wanted him to become a builder instead of a destroyer. On had ignored her wishes and joined the fleet to prove his strength. Now, floating in space with his ship broken and his crew wounded, he was beginning to wonder if his mother had been right. What would you build? Danny asked. On thought about it. Homes, I think. Places where families could be safe and happy. Places where children could grow without fear of war. That sounds wonderful. It is a foolish dream, our warriors. We do not build, we conquer. Danny shook his head. No dream is foolish if it makes the galaxy a better place. And I think a warrior who chooses to become a builder is braver than one who simply continues to fight. On stared at the human for a long moment. Then he looked down at the food Danny had made for him, the care that had gone into every bite. He thought about the doctors who had treated his wounds, the engineers who were fixing his ship, the workers who smiled at him in the corridors even though his people had been their enemies. Why, he asked, why do you do all of this? Danny smiled. It was the same smile he had given Admiral or at the airlock, warm and genuine and completely without calculation. Because everyone deserves kindness, he said, even those who have never known it before. By the end of the second week, the Eternal Dawn was nearly ready to depart. The repairs were complete. The wounded were healed or stable enough to travel. The engines hummed with new life, and the hull gleamed where human welders had sealed its wounds. Admiral Orr called his officers together for a final meeting before departure. They gathered in the conference room of the station, surrounded by humans and who had worked side by side for weeks. The atmosphere was strange. These were species that should have been enemies, yet they stood together as something closer to friends. I have commanded the Third Fleet for 60 years, Orr said. I have seen victories and defeats. I have known allies and enemies, but I have never experienced what we found at this station. He turned to Danny Morales, who stood with Laura and the other senior staff. You have given us more than repairs. You have shown us a different way to exist in this galaxy. I do not fully understand it yet, but I intend to learn. Danny nodded. "You are welcome back anytime, Admiral, for repairs or just to visit." Or almost smiled, rarely smiled, but the muscles of his face tried to form something close to it. As the eternal dawn departed Meridian Station, or stood alone on his bridge and composed a message. It was short and simple, transmitted to every fleet commander in the Armada. "When your ships are damaged, seek the humans. When your crews are wounded, seek the humans. They are unlike anything we have known. They possess a power that is not measured in weapons or shields. I do not yet have a name for this power, but I believe it may be the most valuable thing in the galaxy." He sent the message and watched Earth grow smaller on his screen. He had arrived as a desperate conqueror. He was leaving as something else, something new. He was leaving as a student of humanity. Part 3. The word spreads. 1 year after the eternal dawn departed Meridian Station, the galaxy began to change. Admiral Orr's message had spread far beyond the fleets. It passed from species to species, translated into hundreds of languages, discussed in ports and stations across known space. The humans have something different. The humans will help anyone. The humans treat strangers like family. At first, many species dismissed the stories as propaganda or exaggeration. The Confederacy, a proud reptilian civilization that had been at war with them for centuries, laughed at the idea that their enemies would praise a primitive species. The Hive, a collective that operated without individual emotion, could not comprehend the concept of helping others without clear benefit. The Mechanical Collective of Andros, a network of artificial beings who calculated everything in terms of efficiency, saw no logic in the human approach. But damaged ships kept appearing at human stations, and every crew that arrived desperate and broken left with stories that matched what Orr had reported. The humans healed them. The humans fed them. The humans treated them with respect and kindness regardless of their species or their history. Word spread, and then the ships began to come in greater numbers. Meridian Station could not handle the volume. Chief Engineer Danny Morales worked with Earth's government to build 17 more orbital repair facilities. Each one operated on the same principles that had made Meridian famous. Every visitor was treated as a guest. Every crew was cared for as if they were family. Every ship was repaired with skill and dedication. Not everyone was happy about this development. Admiral Vance of Earth's Unified Space Command stood before the Governing Council and argued against the open-door policy. "We are making ourselves vulnerable," she said. "These species have weapons that could destroy our planet in hours. They have conquered worlds and enslaved peoples, and we are inviting them into our home with open arms." The Council listened to her concerns. They were valid. Humanity was young and relatively weak compared to the galactic powers. A single fleet could overwhelm Earth's defenses. They had weapons that could crack continents, the numbered in the trillions across their hive worlds. But Director of the Repair Initiative stood to respond. He was an older man with white hair and gentle eyes that had seen decades of human struggle and triumph. "Admiral Vance is correct about the risks," he said, "but she is not considering the evidence. In 12 months of operation, not a single alien vessel has attacked a human station or colony. Not one. We have welcomed species that are enemies to each other, and they have shared our repair bays in peace. The who have been at war for 300 years, docked at Meridian Station simultaneously last month. They did not fight. They did not even argue. They ate together in our cafeteria and shared stories about the repairs they needed." Admiral Vance frowned. "That proves nothing. They could turn on us at any moment." "They could," agreed, "but they have not. And do you know why? Because they need us, not our weapons, not our technology, not our military strength. They need what we offer freely, compassion. Somewhere in this galaxy filled with conquerors and survivors, humanity has become the only species that asks nothing in return for kindness, and that has made us sacred ground." The Council voted to continue the open-door policy. Admiral Vance accepted the decision with grace, though she remained watchful. She increased security around the stations and prepared contingency plans. She was not wrong to be cautious, but was not wrong either. Far from Earth, at Horizon Station near Jupiter, lead engineer was about to face the strangest case in human repair history. She was a young woman with red hair and freckles who had risen quickly through the engineering ranks because of her ability to solve problems that no one else could crack. She liked puzzles. She liked challenges. She liked proving that humans could do anything they set their minds to. The ship that arrived at Horizon Station was unlike anything she had seen before. It was organic, a living vessel grown rather than built, pulsing with biological systems that easy understanding. The hive ship carried 10,000 drones and their dying queen. The emissary was a drone designated 77. It approached with movements that were stiff and mechanical, its multifaceted eyes reflecting her image 100 times over. "Our queen is failing," 77 said. "Her life support chamber was damaged in a stellar collision. Without the chamber, she will die within hours. Without her, we lose collective purpose. Without purpose, we cease to function." Studied the data that 77 provided. The Queen's chamber was a complex blend of biological and mechanical systems that regulated her life functions and connected her telepathically to the hive. The damage was extensive. Several key components were completely destroyed. "I have never worked on biological systems like this," said honestly. "I am an engineer, not a doctor or a—" 77's head tilted slightly. "Then we will die, the Queen will fail, the hive will scatter, 10,000 of us will lose everything we are." Looked at the drone standing before her. They were supposed to be emotionless, incapable of feeling anything beyond basic instinct. But she saw something in 77's posture, in the slight tremor of its limbs, in the way its eyes kept glancing back toward the hive ship. It was afraid. This creature that was supposedly incapable of fear was terrified of losing its queen and its purpose and its people. "Give me 16 hours," said. "I will figure something out." She assembled the strangest team in Horizon Station's history. Engineers who normally worked on engines and hulls joined forces with doctors and they studied the Queen's chamber together, sharing knowledge across disciplines that rarely overlapped. They argued and debated and proposed solutions that were rejected and revised and proposed again. Worked without sleep. She ate meals at her workstation and barely noticed when day shifted to night and back again. Her team followed her example, driven by something more powerful than duty or payment. They were driven by the knowledge that 10,000 lives depended on them. In the 14th hour, had a breakthrough. The Queen's chamber used biological components to regulate her telepathic connection to the hive. These components were destroyed and could not be replaced, but human medical technology included neural interface systems designed to help paralyzed patients control machines with their thoughts. The principle was similar enough that it might work. "It is a long shot," one of the doctors said. "We are combining human and technology in ways that have never been attempted. There are 100 things that could go wrong." "Then we will fix them as they come up," replied. "We do not have time for certainty, we only have time for trying." They worked through the final 2 hours with desperate intensity. The Queen's vital signs were dropping. The hive drones waited in silent anguish, connected to their queen and feeling her fade with every passing minute. When finally activated the hybrid system, she held her breath. The monitors flickered. The Queen's life signs wavered. For a terrible moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the Queen's vital signs stabilized. Then they strengthened. Then, for the first time in days, the Queen opened her eyes. The reaction from the hive was immediate and overwhelming. 10,000 drones felt their queen return to them. 10,000 minds reconnected to the collective. 10,000 turned their attention to the small human woman with red hair who had saved their entire existence. 77 approached. Without warning, it pressed its forehead to hers, a gesture that reserved only for members of their own hive. "You are hive now," 77 said. "Always. Wherever you go in this galaxy, wherever exist, you will be one of us. Your species will be protected. Your stations will be sacred. This is the promise of the hive, and it will never be broken." Did not know what to say. She had simply done her job. She had helped people who needed help because that was what humans did. But as she looked into the multifaceted eyes of the drone, she realized that something larger was happening. With every ship they repaired, with every crew they healed, with every act of compassion they offered freely, humanity was weaving itself into the fabric of the galaxy. They were becoming essential, not because of their power, but because of their heart. And that, perhaps, was the greatest power of all. Part 4: The Coalition's Test. 5 years of peace had made humanity believe that their approach to the galaxy was working. The repair stations orbiting Earth and its colonies had become sacred ground, places where former enemies could dock side by side without violence. The fleets, the warships, the hive vessels, and dozens of other species all knew that human stations were neutral territory. But peace, like all things, had limits. The Dominion of Shadows came from the far edge of the galaxy, a region that had been silent for. They were conquerors in the sense, a species that had evolved to dominate and destroy. Their ships were black as the void between stars, invisible to most sensors until they struck. Their weapons could crack planets. Their soldiers felt no mercy because mercy was a concept they had never developed. The supreme ruler of the Dominion looked at the galaxy's map and saw opportunities everywhere. But one thing puzzled him. His scouts reported that many species had become dependent on small stations orbiting a world called Earth. These stations repaired damaged ships and healed wounded crews. They were undefended, vulnerable, and apparently vital to much of the galaxy's military infrastructure. The solution was obvious. Destroy their healing places, the supreme ruler declared to his war council. When their ships cannot be repaired, when their wounded cannot be saved, they will fall, all of them, one by one. The attack on Meridian Station came without warning on a quiet morning. Chief Engineer Danny Morales was reviewing repair schedules in his office when the alarm started screaming. He rushed to the command center and found Laura already there, her face pale as she stared at the screens. The Dominion fleet filled the monitors. Hundreds of black ships, weapons charging, moving toward the station with predatory grace. They came out of nowhere, Laura said. Our sensors never detected them until they were practically on top of us. Danny watched the enemy fleet approach and felt something he had not felt in years. Fear. Real fear. Not for himself, but for everyone on his station, for the crews they were hosting, for the mission they had built over years of work and sacrifice. Evacuate non-essential personnel, he ordered. Get the vulnerable to the shelters, and send a distress call to everyone who can hear us. The distress call went out across all frequencies, traveling at the speed of light to every corner of the solar system and beyond. It reached Earth's military command. It reached civilian ships. It reached the dozens of alien vessels currently in orbit waiting for repairs. And then something happened that the Dominion had not anticipated. Before the first enemy shot could be fired, a massive vessel dropped out of hyperspace between the Dominion fleet and Meridian Station. It was the Eternal Dawn, Admiral Orr's flagship, fully repaired and bristling with weapons. Behind it came the rest of the Third Fleet, 40 warships that had answered the human call. Orr's voice echoed across all channels, "You will not touch this place." Within minutes, more ships arrived. A battle group, led by Commander who had once been Orr's bitter enemy. A hive swarm, thousands of small attack drones moving in perfect coordination. The angular vessels of the mechanical collective of Andros, their weapons systems coldly efficient. Ships from species that Danny had never even met, all coming to defend the station that had helped them in their darkest hours. The Dominion's supreme ruler watched the growing fleet with something he had never experienced before: confusion. These species were supposed to be enemies, the end that had been at war for centuries. They had no alliances with anyone. The mechanical collective calculated every action for maximum self-benefit. Why were they fighting together? The battle that followed lasted 3 days. It was the largest military engagement the galaxy had seen in recorded history. The Dominion forces were powerful and ruthless, but they were facing something unprecedented: a coalition of species that fought as one. Danny Morales refused to evacuate. He stayed at Meridian Station with Laura and the rest of his crew, coordinating repair efforts even as the battle raged around them. When Allied ships were damaged, they limped to the station for emergency repairs and then returned to the fight. Human engineers worked on cruisers, destroyers, and bioships with equal skill and dedication. Park led a team onto a damaged mechanical collective vessel to repair its main weapon array. The synthetic beings on board had never interacted closely with organic life before. They found humor confusing but his technical skill impressive. "Why do you risk yourself for us?" one of the mechanical beings asked him. "We are not your species. We are not even organic. You have no logical reason to help us." Finished the repair and wiped sweat from his forehead. "You needed help. That is reason enough." Drake managed logistics for an operation that spanned the entire solar system. Ships needed fuel, ammunition, food, medical supplies. Wounded were transported to stations that could care for them. Damaged vessels were prioritized based on their ability to return to combat. It was the most complex operation she had ever coordinated, and she executed it flawlessly. When a cruiser was boarded by Dominion soldiers, human Marines joined the defense. Captain Hayes led his team through corridors filled with enemy fire, fighting alongside the reptilian warriors. They moved as one unit, covering each other, protecting each other, bleeding for each other. Took a wound defending a soldier who had been caught in the open. They dragged him to cover and applied pressure to his injury while the battle continued around them. "You saved my life," they said, his voice rough with emotion. "I do not even know your name." "Hayes," the captain replied through gritted teeth. "Pleased to meet you." They laughed, a harsh barking sound that was somehow also warm. "I am, or I will remember this day. I will tell my hatchlings about the human who bled for me." By the end of the third day, the Dominion fleet was broken. Their supreme ruler ordered a retreat, his remaining ships fleeing toward the darkness from which they had come. The coalition had won, but the cost had been high. Thousands had died on all sides. Ships floated in ruins. Stations bore the scars of battle. But Meridian Station still stood, and so did every other human repair facility. In the aftermath, Admiral Orr stood on the damaged bridge of his ship and watched the coalition fleet gather around the human stations. Beside mechanical beings, species that had been enemies for generations, now standing together in the silence after battle. A communication came through from Admiral Vance of Earth's military. She had commanded the human defense forces during the battle, and she had watched the alien fleets come to humanity's aid. "Admiral Orr," she said, her voice carrying a respect she had not felt before. "I owe you and your coalition a debt I can never repay. You saved my people." Orr shook his massive head. "No, Admiral, your people saved us. Years ago, when we arrived broken and desperate, humans showed us something we had forgotten. That kindness is not weakness. That compassion builds stronger alliances than conquest ever could. We came to your defense because we could do nothing else. You are our healers. You are our friends. And we protect those we care for." Was silent for a long moment. She had been the one arguing against the open-door policy. She had been the one warning about alien threats. And now those same aliens had bled and died to protect humanity. "I was wrong about your people," she said finally. "I was wrong about a lot of things." Or almost smiled. "Understanding takes time. The humans taught me that as well." In the days that followed, the coalition did not dissolve. Instead, it grew stronger. Representatives from every species that had fought together met on Meridian Station to discuss the future. They created a formal alliance, one built not on mutual benefit or strategic advantage but on shared values. They called it the Coalition of Repair, and its central principle was simple: any member in need would be helped by all others. The Dominion never returned. Their supreme ruler had seen something in those 3 days of battle that shook his understanding of the galaxy. He had seen former enemies fight as one. He had seen species sacrifice themselves for others. He had seen the power that humanity had built through nothing more than kindness. He did not understand it, he never would, but he knew enough to fear it. And in the heart of Meridian Station, Danny Morales finally allowed himself to rest. He sat in the cafeteria with Laura, Park, and the others who had held the station together through the worst crisis in human history. Around them sat mechanical beings and a dozen other species. They ate together. They laughed together. They mourned their dead together. They were no longer strangers, they were family. And that was the true victory. Part 5, The Heart of the Galaxy. 50 years had passed since the Dominion War. The galaxy that had once been a place of scattered conflicts and endless competition had transformed into something new. The Coalition of Repair had grown from a wartime alliance into the foundation of galactic civilization. Over 100 species were now members, and at the center of everything stood the great station called Unity. Unity was the largest structure ever built by sentient beings. It orbited in neutral space, visible from 100 worlds, a symbol of what cooperation could achieve. Architects had designed its bones. Engineers had built its power systems. Biotechnology maintained its life support. Mechanical collective processors ran its communication networks. Human hands had guided every stage of construction, not because humans were superior, but because they had learned how to bring others together. Elder Danny Morales was 94 years old now. His hair was white and his movements were slow, but his mind remained sharp, and his heart still burned with the same warmth that had greeted Admiral or at the Meridian Station airlock so many decades ago. He sat in his quarters on Unity Station reviewing the morning reports while Laura, equally aged but equally sharp, brought him his morning tea. "The ambassador is requesting to name their new colony after you," Laura said with a smile. Danny shook his head. Tell them to name it after someone who deserves it, one of the young folks doing the actual work, maybe Maria Santos or one of her students. You deserve it, Danny. You started all of this. I did not start anything. I just opened a door. Everyone else walked through it. He looked out the window at the vast expanse of Unity Station. Ships of every design moved through the docking bays. Beings from across the galaxy walked the corridors together. It was a sight that would have seemed impossible when Danny was young, when humanity was still learning that they were not alone in the universe. Below his quarters, the station hummed with activity. In the engineering bays, a young woman named Maria Santos was training a group of mechanical beings from Andros in adaptive repair techniques. She had her mother's patience and her grandmother's skill, and she had grown up in a galaxy where species working together was the norm rather than the exception. The mechanical beings watched her with optical sensors that flickered with something like curiosity. They had been designed for pure logic, but decades of interaction with organic species had changed them. They had developed something that their creators had never intended: appreciation for inefficiency, for emotion, for the strange way that organic beings did things that made no logical sense yet somehow worked. The key to adaptive repair is not just technical knowledge, Maria explained. It is understanding what the crew needs, not just what the ship needs. A vessel might have a minor engine problem, but the crew might be exhausted and scared and far from home. Fixing the engine is important. Making the crew feel safe is also important, sometimes more important. One of the mechanical beings tilted its head. This is inefficient. Emotional support requires resources that could be allocated to technical repairs. Maria smiled. That is true, but efficiency is not the only goal. Connection matters. Trust matters. When that crew goes home, they will remember how they felt when they were here. They will tell others. And when the next ship needs help, they will come to us without hesitation. The resources we spend on emotional support create stronger relationships than any technical repair ever could. The mechanical being processed this information. It was learning something that pure logic could never teach, that the heart was sometimes more powerful than the mind. In the medical wing, Doctor treated patients from across the galaxy. She had studied under Cole before he passed away 15 years ago, and she carried his legacy forward with every life she saved. Her team was a diverse mix of species who had all learned the human approach to medicine: treat every patient as if they were family. Today she was caring for an elderly who had lived through the Dominion War. He had been a young warrior on the Eternal Dawn when it first arrived at Meridian Station. Now he was old and weak, his scales fatting and his heart struggling. He had come to Unity Station not for treatment but for something else. I wanted to see it, he told in a voice that rasped with age. Before I die, I wanted to see what we built together. Held his hand, the scales rough against her skin. You helped build this. You were there at the beginning. No, the humans built this. We just followed your example. He looked out the window at the station beyond. I remember when my people thought strength was the only power that mattered. We conquered because we could. We destroyed because we were able. We believed kindness was weakness and compassion was foolishness. He coughed and steadied him gently. Then we met you, he continued. And everything changed, not because you defeated us in battle, not because you threatened us or made demands. You simply helped us when we needed help. You asked for nothing. You judged nothing. You opened your doors and your hearts to people who had been your enemies. He squeezed her hand with the last of his strength. That was the real power. That was what conquered us all. The annual Unity Summit brought delegations from every member species to the station. Ambassadors and leaders gathered to discuss trade, policy, and the future of their alliance. But the summit was more than politics. It was a celebration of what they had become together. Admiral Orr had passed away 20 years ago, but his legacy lived on. His granddaughter now commanded the fleet, and she had been raised on stories of the humans who had saved her grandfather's ship and his soul. She walked through Unity Station with pride, not the pride of a conqueror, but the pride of someone who belonged to something greater than herself. A young officer approached Danny Morales with nervous reverence. He was barely an adult by his species standards, his scales still bright with youth. Chief Engineer Morales, he said, stumbling slightly over the human pronunciation. My grandmother served on the Eternal Dawn. She was there when you first welcomed Admiral Orr to Meridian Station. She told me stories about you until her dying day. Danny smiled, the same warm smile he had worn for 9 decades. I remember her. She worked in the engine room. She brought me a gift before the ship departed, a small crystal from her. The young's eyes widened. You remember that? I remember every crew that ever came through my station, every face, every story. That is what matters, you know, not the ships we repaired or the systems we fixed, the people, the connections, the moments when strangers became friends. The young officer pressed his forehead to Danny's hand, a gesture of deepest respect in culture. My grandmother said you taught us a word, he said, a human word that we did not have in our language before we met you. She said it was the most powerful force in the universe. What word? Compassion. Danny looked out at the station around him. He saw talking with who had once been their enemies. He saw drones working alongside mechanical beings who could not have been more different from them. He saw humans moving through it all, connecting everything, holding it together with nothing more than kindness. He thought about the journey that had brought them here, the desperate arrival of a wounded warship, the decision to help without asking questions, the risks they had taken and the trust they had built, the war they had won not through weapons but through unity, the galaxy they had changed one act of compassion at a time. Your grandmother was very wise, Danny said. Compassion is just a word, but what it means, what it creates, that is something more. It is the understanding that we are all connected, that every being in this galaxy matters, that strength comes not from domination but from lifting others up. The young listened with intensity that matched his grandmother's fire. When a wounded ship appeared in our skis, Danny continued, we never asked who they were or what they had done. We only asked one question. He paused and looked at the young officer with eyes that had seen the galaxy transform. How can we help? The young nodded slowly, and in that question lay everything. Danny smiled one final time, the smile that had welcomed strangers and turned them into family, the smile that had launched a revolution of kindness across the stars. In that question, he agreed, lay the heart of humanity's true power. And outside the window, the galaxy continued to turn, no longer a place of endless war and fearful isolation. It had become something else, something that had seemed impossible when Danny was young. It had become a home, vast and diverse and endlessly beautiful. A home built on the simple power of asking how to help.